Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to install, configure and test DHCP server in Windows Server 2016 environment. First I will log into Windows Server 2016. After logging in, by default the server manager opens. From here I will go to add roles and features and then go next. Next again, and then from the server roles I will select DHCP server and then confirm by selecting add features and then go next again, next, and then install. So at the last screen you can see there's an option, it says complete DHCP configuration. I can select this one, or I can close this window and then go to the warning sign and complete the DHCP configuration. So I will show the one that you can see from the warning sign. So close here and go to the warning notification and then click on complete DHCP configuration. And then go next. Here make sure you have the domain name. This is my domain name. Actual domain name is huda.local and then / administrator. So this is basically the domain administrator, and then click on commit, then close. After you install the DHCP service, you will see a new item under tools menu, and that is called DHCP. So I'll select this, so the DHCP window opens. Next I will expand the server and then expand IPv4. I'll make this window a little bigger so that you can see more detail. Next I can go to the action menu and then new scope, or I can also right click on the IPv4 and then select new scope. So I go next, and I will give a name to this scope. Huda-0000, and then in the description I can write what I want this scope to be. For example, IP range 50 to 100. So I go next, then I will type in the start IP address, which I want as 172.16.0.50, and the end IP address 172.16.0.100. The subnet mask was picked up automatically based on the class of this IP, and I will keep it as default. Now this range is defining which IP addresses this DHCP scope will assign to the clients. So I go next. I can exclude some of the IP addresses from that range that I defined in the previous screen. For example, if an IP address such as 172.16.0.80, which is within the range that I took before, and if this IP address has been assigned to a server, in that case this DHCP server should not allocate that IP address to a client. If it does, then there will be an IP address conflict, so the same IP address goes to different machines, and that is a problem. So if any of the IP addresses from the range you want to keep aside for any specific machine, typically static IP is assigned to servers. In that case, you will exclude that specific IP addresses or IP address range on this screen. I will just show you an example. Let's say 172.16.0. let's say 81 to 85. These 5 IP addresses I want to exclude from the scope, and the reason I want to exclude, I'm assuming that these 5 IP addresses were used for other computers, and to avoid conflict, I need to exclude these IP addresses from the defined range. So I click on Add. That means the scope I'm defining ranges from 50 to 80 and then 86 to 100. I excluded 80 to 85. First, I defined the range 50 to 100 and then excluded 80 to 85. So 80 to 85 will not be assigned to a client machine. Alright, so I go next. And then once an IP address is assigned to a client machine, how long that IP is released? The default is 8 days. That's fine. We go next. And then there are other DHCP configuration options such as default gateway, DNS server IP, and so on. So I'm going to say yes, I want to configure these options now and go next. So when this DHCP server provides an IP address to a client, it can also give the default gateway information, and that information I need to type in here. I will use 172.16.0.2 and then click on Add. There's the gateway. The gateway IP is an IP of a router through which you can go outside this network. So I go next. Then it recognized the domain name, which is huda.local, and I need to provide the IP address of a DNS server so that the client machines know which IP to communicate if it needs to communicate to a DNS server. And it already picked up the IP address of the DNS server, which is 172.16.0.10. Essentially, it's the same as this server. So this server's IP is 172.16.0.10 and this server is running a DNS server. So the DNS server IP is the same IP as this server IP because it's already recognized. So I don't need to add anything else. So I go next. In the Win server configuration, I keep the default and I go next. And then there is an option activate the scope, and I want to say yes, I want to activate this scope now. So I click next and then finish. So this scope for the -0000 has been created and activated. The address pool starts at 172.16.0.50 and ends at 172.16.0.100, and it excludes the IPs from 81 to 85. Currently there is no address list. That means no client machine got IP address from this DHCP server. And then if you go to the scope options, you can see other information such as DNS server IP address and default gateway. Alright, so the basic configuration of the DHCP server is done. Next, I'm going to test if this DHCP server is actually providing IP information to a client machine. I have a Windows 7 client, so I will run this machine. Next, I'll configure the network card of this client machine to get an IP address from a DHCP server. So I go to the network setting, change adapter setting, and then go to the network card, right click on it and go to properties, and then go to TCP IP version 4, and then select obtain an IP address automatically and also obtain DNS server address automatically, and then click OK and OK. After waiting a minute or so, the client should be able to get an IP address from a DHCP server. So go to the command prompt and check the IP address by typing ipconfig. You can see that it got an IP address 172.16.0.50. That was the first IP address in the range that we used to configure the DHCP server. Sometimes your client machine may not get the IP address from the range in VMware workstation environment. If you find that happening, then make sure that the VMware workstation is not running a DHCP server itself. And you can check that by going to Edit, Virtual Network Editor, and then select on Host Only, go to Change Settings, and then select Host Only again, and then uncheck Use Local DHCP Service to distribute IP address to VMs. So this is essentially a DHCP server run in the VMware workstation, and your client machine that is set up to get an IP address from a DHCP server can get an IP from this range. In that case, your own DHCP server configured in Windows Server might not give the IP address to the client. Also, if I go to the Windows Server and look at the used addresses and refresh, and you can see that the IP address 172.16.0.50 has been list. Another important note is that your client machines, VMware workstations, network settings, and servers, VMware workstations, network settings have to be the same. If this is host only, then the server has to be host only too. So I cancel this one and go to the settings of the server, and then go to the network adapter 2, which has the IP address as 172.16.0.10, and it's running the DHCP server. It's also host only. So if one of these machines is in NAT mode and another is host only, then they will not be able to communicate even though your DHCP is configured correctly. Be mindful about these network settings in VMware Workstation, as well as be mindful about a DHCP server running in VMware Workstation by default. That is the end of this video. I hope you found this video was helpful. If you would like to receive notifications on future videos, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and set up notification by tapping on the bell. Thank you for watching.